The neon lights outside O'Malley's bar flickered against the wet pavement of downtown Cleveland, Ohio, and there he was, slumped against the brick wall, tie loosened, eyes glazed, pride completely shattered. Mason Carter, the most disciplined, punctual, straight-laced man in our accounting department, was drunk. Not the casual, laughing kind of drunk. The broken kind. The kind that looks like it has been holding something in for too long. For a moment, I stood there with my car keys in my hand, debating whether to walk away. It wasn't my problem. I had my own bills, my own stress, my own quiet battles. But something about the way his shoulders shook in the cold night air stopped me. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and doing the right thing even when no one is watching, take a second right now to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs a reminder that humanity still exists, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this matter. I had never seen Mason like that before. At work, he was composed and methodical, the kind of guy who color-coded spreadsheets and brought homemade lunch every day. We weren't close friends, just coworkers who shared small talk about deadlines and weekend errands. That night had been a team celebration after closing a major contract, and while most of us had a drink or two, Mason kept going. I noticed it but didn't say anything. None of us did. That's how it usually happens. Everyone assumes someone else will step in. When I walked past him, he looked up at me with red, exhausted eyes. There was no pride left in them, only defeat. He tried to stand and almost fell. I caught him instinctively, and that was the moment I knew I couldn't leave. The drive to his house in a quiet suburb outside Cleveland was long and heavy with silence. Mason muttered apologies under his breath the entire way. Not to me, I think, to someone else, to himself. He gave me his address in broken pieces, like each word weighed too much. As I drove, I realized something uncomfortable. I had judged him. I had assumed he was the stable one, the man who had it all figured out. But there he was, unraveling in the passenger seat of my Honda Civic, just another human being cracking under pressure. When we pulled into his driveway, the porch light was on. A soft yellow glow cut through the darkness. The house looked modest but warm. Christmas lights still lined the edges of the roof, even though it was mid-January. I remember thinking someone inside cared enough to leave them up a little longer. Helping him out of the car was harder than I expected. He leaned heavily on me, his weight almost dragging us both down. My shoulder ached, but I tightened my grip. When we reached the front door, it opened before we could knock. A woman stood there, her face pale with worry. Her name, I would later learn, was Rebecca. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her hair was pulled back hastily, and her eyes darted over Mason before settling on me. There was no anger in her expression, only exhaustion and something else, fear. I explained quickly that he'd had too much to drink and that I didn't want him driving. She nodded, stepping aside so we could guide him inside. The house smelled like chamomile tea and laundry detergent. A small pair of sneakers sat by the door, next to a tiny pink backpack. They had a child. That realization hit me harder than expected. We helped Mason to the couch. He was barely conscious now, mumbling incoherently. Rebecca covered him with a blanket without saying a word. She moved gently, like someone used to carrying invisible weight. I felt awkward standing there, unsure whether to leave or offer help. But then she looked at me in a way I can't fully explain. It wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't shame. It was gratitude layered with relief so deep it almost hurt to witness. She walked me to the door quietly. As we stepped onto the porch, the cold air wrapped around us. That's when she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She told me that Mason had been struggling for months. The company restructuring had put him at risk of losing his job. He hadn't told anyone at work. At home, their daughter Ava had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition. Medical bills were piling up. Mason had been working overtime, taking extra shifts, pretending everything was fine. Tonight was the first time he had broken. Rebecca said he never drank. Not like that. He carried everything silently because he believed it was his job to protect his family from fear. And then she did something I will never forget. She reached into her coat pocket and handed me a small folded piece of paper. I hesitated, confused. She insisted softly. When I opened it, I saw it was a child's drawing. A stick-figure family holding hands under a bright yellow sun. In uneven crayon letters at the top were the words, "My daddy is my hero." Rebecca told me Ava had drawn it that morning before school. Mason had tucked it into his wallet. It must have fallen out in the car when I helped him. She said she wanted me to have it for a night, just until tomorrow, so I could understand why bringing him home mattered. Her voice trembled as she thanked me, not with dramatic words, not with tears, just with a sincerity that cut straight through me. She said I didn't just save him from a DUI or embarrassment. I saved him from making one mistake that could have destroyed everything they were fighting for. I drove home in silence, the drawing resting on my passenger seat. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how close I came to walking away, how easy it would have been to ignore him, to say someone else would handle it, and how that small decision, to stay, had protected a family I barely knew. The next morning at work, Mason didn't show up. Whispers circulated around the office. I said nothing. Around noon, I received a text from an unknown number. It was Mason. He apologized for the inconvenience, for the trouble, for being a burden. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I told him he wasn't a burden, that everyone breaks sometimes, that heroes need help too. When he returned to work 2 days later, he looked different, not ashamed, humbled. He asked me to step outside during lunch. The winter air was sharp, but the sun was bright. He told me Rebecca had told him everything, about the ride, about the porch, about the drawing. He admitted he had felt like a failure lately, like he was drowning quietly while pretending to swim. Then he said something that stayed with me. He said that when he woke up on that couch and saw the blanket tucked around him, he realized he wasn't alone, and that maybe strength wasn't about carrying everything by yourself. Maybe it was about letting someone catch you when you fall. Over the next few weeks, something shifted. Mason spoke to HR about his workload. The company arranged a temporary remote schedule to help with Ava's medical appointments. A few of us at the office quietly organized a fundraiser for his family's medical bills. Nothing flashy, just people deciding to care. And me? I changed too. I stopped assuming everyone who looked put together actually was. I started checking in on people more, offering rides, offering coffee, offering time. A month later, Mason invited me over for dinner. Ava answered the door herself, holding that same drawing, now laminated. She handed it to me and said her mom told her I was the man who made sure her daddy got home safe. Rebecca smiled from the kitchen, and Mason's eyes were clearer than I had ever seen them. Before this story ends, I want to ask you something from the heart. If this story has touched you even a little, if it reminded you of someone you should check on, someone you should forgive, someone you should help, please engage with this video. Like it, share it, let it travel further than we ever could alone. And before you go, I have a special request. Comment the word kindness below if you believe small actions can change entire lives. That night outside the bar, I thought I was just doing a simple favor, but sometimes the smallest decisions carry the greatest weight. Sometimes driving someone home isn't just about the ride, it's about protecting their tomorrow. I almost left him there, and I thank God every day that I didn't.